it's evident that he cares. What do you care about? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show. Rock Newman Show.
The reparations poem, pay me my money. Just so you pay me all that I'm due. If you have to rob Peter to pay Paul, that's on you. I'm coming from all ends just to make ends meet, so I'm overworked, underpaid, and dead on my feet. Don't mean to rain on nobody's parade, but I want what I need, and I'm trying to get paid. And if you don't have it, no, I won't try and understand. So pay me my money, all of my money, just as soon as you can. I can't help but to regret it because sometimes it's gone before I get it. And if I had what's due to me instead of just making do, I could pay Peter, Paul, and Mr. Bobo too. Don't mean to rain on nobody's parade, but I want what I need, and I'm trying to get paid. And if you don't have it, no, I won't try and understand. So pay me my money, all of my money, just as soon as you can. Pay me my money. I'm Poet Danny Queen. Actually, I had been recording for Tony Broder's organization, the Institute of Comic Guidance, and her reputation, of course, preceded her. And so I called her up and set up a meeting. I went to meet her at her office. And when I met her at the office, she said, and I told her what I did. I'm Danny Queen, I'm young. I'm Danny Queen, I do audio recording, and I'd like to be able to record some of your lectures. She said, well, that's interesting. She said, because I had been looking for somebody to record the lectures for years. That's interesting. So I just showed up, and she said, yeah, that would, yeah. She said, that would be great. And so she said, well, we meet at the Howard Inn at that time. She said, we'll meet every second Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock. And she said, yeah. She said, you come and record all the lectures. And at the time, we were doing cassette tapes. She said, you record all the lectures, and we'll, she said, when we sell the tapes, you keep the 60 and give me the 40. And she also said, the 40%, so that's how we worked it out. But she also said, now, I ain't got time, Danny, to be dragging no equipment around, no speakers and stuff. She said, because I have a private practice, I don't have time to do it. That's the doc. You ain't got to do anything. You don't have to do anything except for this when we meet at Howard. Just show up. I have everything set up, everything ready. All you got to do is come, pick up the mic, and start talking. And we did that for 30 years. So it's just really interesting, man. But no contracts, no lawyers, none of that. Just a handshake and a hug for 30 years. That's all it was. All her theories. She was outspoken, and she was just brilliant in what she said and how she said it. She introduced me to Neely Fuller. Yeah, and it's just, I said, this lady here, she on to something. So, I took a liking to her lectures. A deep, more than a liking, a love, and come to understand what she was saying at a whole nother level. And so I wanted to be a part of that. About 1700.
1700.
Yes. Yeah, we started doing it on cassette tapes, and from there, well, let me start here. At first, I had this professional recording equipment that I got at Landau Mall, this Briggs music store. So I got this 4-track recorder, and I started recording Dr. Watson on the 4-track recorder. And then I had this big boombox like the kids used to walk around the street with on their shoulders, and that would be my speaker. So I would record through that, put the CD cassette in that, and use that as a speaker at the same time, but actually recording through the 4-track recorder. And so I learned how to do all of that, set it up at my house in the living room.
And you also had a show at Bowie's.
Yes, Calling Me Poetry.
And so what was the most and she was a guest on your
She was a guest on my show. That was like 95, something like that.
So what was the most memorable points, would you think, on that show that you had when you had her on your show?
Well, she explained the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. And she went in depth about that. And her theory, she also talked about the Crest theory as well. Yeah, because I was first introduced to the Crest. Now, this was long before the ISIS papers, when I first met her. But the ISIS papers came out, I think, in like 1990. Yeah. So actually, yeah, I guess it wasn't long before the, well, my introduction to the Crest theory, and then of course the ISIS papers came later. But yeah, she talked about all of it. She talked about the black family. But the thing about Doc, she explained things and said, I mean, even with all her degrees, she knew how to talk to common people. That's what I loved about her. She didn't talk down to people. She didn't like. She never came off like, I'm Doctor So and So, and no, no, she never came off like that. She was a part of the community, and she talked about how she was a doctor, third generation. Her father was a doctor, her grandfather was a doctor, and she always said how her father was always a race man. She grew up in that kind of household where you went out and you got a good education, and you come back and you did things for the community. It wasn't about self. She never talked like that.
Well, let's talk about her relationship with Nellie Fuller. What from your observation, how would you describe it?
Oh, wow. Really deep friendship. And she talked about how when she first met him years ago, she met him at a Black Power Committee meeting here in D.C. She said she never went to parties and stuff. But I think she said her sister convinced her to come to the power meeting. And she said people were, playing music, and people were sitting on the floor and eating African food and stuff. So, and people were just talking. She said she heard this gentleman over in the corner talking to somebody, and he kept saying, racism is a system. Racism is a power system. She said she kept hearing this gentleman say that. And she said, she was talking to somebody. She said, well, excuse me, I got to talk to that gentleman there. That's how she met Nellie Fuller. She said, because some of his ideas were just amazing. Now, mind you, Nellie Fuller was a gentleman who worked at the Bureau of Engraving for, all those years, 30-some years, 35 years or something. So he wasn't, he was a thinking person, but a deep thinking person. He started writing the code and the Korean War in the 1950s. He said on the side of a radar spot, I forget what they call it, the station, waiver station. He started writing the code.
Peaceful greetings. I'm Sabrina Johnson, a longtime devoted student of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., who are pioneers in understanding the system of racism, white supremacy, what's mostly known as racism, but a system of white supremacy that encompasses every dimension of our living, and it's a global system. And we are here continuing the legacy of both of them, but it's also our work in order to replace the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. Ah, yes. It almost seems like we've always known each other. I think initially it was through the National Black Holistic Retreat, or the National Black Holistic Society, which was a number of brothers, including Brother Haki Mahabuti, Brother David Hall, and others, who had formulated a program to meet all of the needs of Black people, and that's why it's called holistic. The cultural, spiritual, historical, nutritional needs, and so they would meet, conduct retreats periodically. And I learned of a retreat happening from a flyer on a bulletin board at a health food co-op, and I decided I would go. And I had the fortunate opportunity to get an early copy of the ISIS papers, The Keys to the Colors, as Third World Press was the original publisher of Dr. Welsing's seminal work, the ISIS papers, The Keys to the Colors. And I guess from there the rest is her story, or our story. And I had the opportunity to see her give presentations, and it just answered a long time, very deeply troubling and unknown question, or set of questions that I had in my mind, and it it gave me the framework of understanding that I needed to understand what had happened and what was happening to me as a black person who grew up in the Deep South and had plenty of exposure to the terroristic actions of and just the mistreatment by people who classify themselves as white. But I really didn't understand why. I didn't understand the depths of the various dimensions of racism, and I really was interested to understand it. Yes, so just watching her delivery of information, it was very calm, very serious, and I could, connect with the concept she was presenting. And they answered my questions. I saw her present a number of times, both at the National Black Holistic Retreats. There was a National Black Kwanzaa retreat, and she was a keynote speaker. But also, she came to speak at various academic institutions. And when I happened to be in the vicinity, I attended, particularly in the days when I was in the Boston area. And then I moved to the DC area, and I learned about her institute, the Cress Welsing Institute, that met monthly from September to June. And I made sure that I was there in the audience every time, and it was just a lifetime calendar commitment. It became a part of my life because number one, it was what I needed to understand what was going on, to strategize what I needed to do when I encountered all kinds of problems, whether it was in the workplace or in community life and family life, etc. It was free therapy, really. The Cress Welsing Institute, I call it a cosmic classroom. And it was a place of exchange of information through and between everyone who was participating. And it helped me get through day-to-day living, and it also helped me formulate goals and a vision for what I wanted to do in my life and how to do it, and maintain some semblance of attempted sanity within the context of the chaos and insanity that is the system of racism, white supremacy. So I was just a devoted student. I was there every session unless I was terribly, terribly, terribly sick or such. And we got to know each other, Dr. Welsing and I, and Mr. Fuller. And things evolved from there to the point where we traveled together to conferences, Race Relations Institute conferences, and with Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller and some of the students from the Cress Welsing Institute. We took a big bus trip to an exhibit at the New York Metropolitan Museum, I think it was. Dr. Welsing and some of the students from the Cress Welsing Institute to see the exhibit Without Sanctuary. I think that was in maybe 2000 or 1999, somewhere in that vicinity. But it was a fascinating trip, a bus ride up there. But to see the images and to not just have any sort of an isolated emotional reaction to seeing all these images of lynchings, that was the exhibit was about, but understanding and being able to reconcile why the things that seem almost humanly impossible, why they occurred. I mean, some of the images included, not just black men hanging from a rope or, the burning or burned remains, but there were gleeful white people who brought their children, their young children, 8 years old, 4 and 3 years old, to watch the spectacle. And these images were captured. And one could think, oh my, how could that even be? But if you understand the system of racism, white supremacy, and what motivates it, which is what Dr. Welsing was able to decode, to develop a framework of understanding why it is that the system exists, then it all makes sense. It's heinous and it's wicked and all of those things that we can say emotionally, but it makes perfect sense if you understand the demographic dynamics on the planet, and you understand the genetic status of people who classify themselves as white and those that they classify as non-white. It all makes sense. Yeah, she was very, very, very warm and kind. If something happened in your life, she would send an appropriate greeting card if there was condolences or whatever the case may be. Very, very patient, a very generous listener. And yeah, she was also she had a great sense of humor. And I was very fortunate to interact with Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller, in the same setting, both at the Cress Welsing Institute. And by the way, Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. is the only person that Dr. Welsing invited as a guest speaker at the Cress Welsing Institute, or to fill in for her for the very few times that she was absent from the Cress Welsing Institute over the course of over 30 years. That says a lot. She spoke of him as being a genius level thinker, and absolutely I agree. But I had the opportunity to interact with them in that setting, but also in a very intimate setting. I began inviting Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller and a few folks from the Institute to my home for, I called it a justice gathering weekend on the Sunday before the Monday that was the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday. And we talk about the one subject that we always talk about, and that is the system of racism, white supremacy. But seeing their interplay was both hilarious at times, and but just very sobering. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. And just seeing how things fit together, I think, from I'll call it a cosmic perspective. You have a male, Mr. Fuller, who was senior to Dr. Welsing in age, who was not, heavily educated in terms of, college and graduate school or any of that, who even characterized himself as quote-unquote country dumb, meaning very simple and basic level understanding of things, who had come up with what no one else had done. As a young person who was just on a radar site in the quiet during a military tour in Japan, who began thinking about racism, what it is, all those many miles away in the early 50s, just thinking about what was going on. So when Dr. Welsing met Mr. Fuller in 1967, he had already been thinking about and writing about racism as a global system, a behavioral system that operated in 9 major areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And hearing a man at a Black Power meeting say, you know, racism is a system, really caught Dr. Welsing's attention. And she and Mr. Fuller began discussing racism at that time, and that began a over 50-year discourse and just phenomenal interaction that gave us the keys to the colors, really. You know, Mr. Fuller figured out the what of the system of racism, white supremacy, and how we can combat it through a systematic, disciplined, codified process. And Dr. Welsing, as a psychiatrist, both general psychiatrist and child psychiatrist, needed to have an understanding of racism in order to treat her and cure her patient population, who always reported some kind of racial incidents and influences in their lives that was causing their mental health to be challenged at best. And so she, because of you know, Mr. Fuller giving her the framework, she then developed a theory about why it is that people who classify themselves as white would develop such a global system of control, domination, and mistreatment of people that they classify as non-white. And it's because of looking at what she had learned in school. You know, she had a lot of you know, educational achievements, all the way to medical school and teaching medical school at Howard University Medical College. So she, you know, developed this theory, the Crest theory of color confrontation, that explained that because on planet Earth the overwhelming majority of people are black people, black and shades of black, brown, red, and yellow, as we kind of colloquially refer to them, but also white skin, or the ability to produce melanin skin pigmentation, is a dominant trait, and people who classify themselves as white because they have insufficient levels of melanin cannot produce sufficient amounts of skin pigmentation, melanin. And so that is a recessive trait, this inability to produce melanin skin pigmentation. And so she figured out, looking at that and looking at behavioral dynamics that she had observed and that she was hearing about in the histories of patients, she formulated the theory that the reason why people who classify themselves as white do what they do in relationship to people that they classify as non-white is because of fear of white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, where the dynamics are as they are, both numerically and genetically. Yeah. Well, I would think, I'll talk a little bit first about the Cress Welsing Institute. There were folks who came through from time to time, like I can remember Dr. Leonard Jeffries. I remember, you know, Dr. Welsing speaking of Dr. Ben. Someone is right at the tip of my tongue that I remember coming through, but I'm not remembering right now. Yeah, Tony Browder would come to the Institute on occasion, and others, you know, locally. Dr. Patricia Newton was sort of a very special case in that Dr. Welsing is the one who influenced her to go into psychiatry. She was, Dr. Newton was planning to be a surgeon, and after, you know, a dialogue, Dr. Welsing recognized something in her and kind of nudged her in that direction and said, "You're a thinker, not a cutter." And so Dr. Newton, you know, very much was deeply influenced by Dr. Welsing, Dr. Welsing's framework of thinking, her approaches to delivering healthcare, mental health care services. And at points later on in life, Dr. Newton was able to assist Dr. Welsing with some medical needs that she had. So it was a full circle relationship, and it's a beautiful thing when the one who you've inspired or one who has been the student can then perform and function in the role of the either provide significant assistance, as the relationship evolves, put it like that.
Well, yeah, a lot of people took issue with what she was saying a lot of times, but when you think about it, when the book came out, when the ISIS Peoples came out, I mean, it was amazing, man. She said at one point she believed that some folk in the white community was buying it. She said upwards of 300 to 400 copies a week or more. They was reading it, but she said they couldn't talk about it. They couldn't do a review on it because she was like, well, what are they gonna say?
Yes. So due to the nature of the system of white supremacy, we meaning victims of racism, non-white people, we have been miseducated, we've been diseducated, and unfortunately there has been a nonstop 360-degree assault on our self-respect and our understanding of the dynamics that we exist within. So we have, there's been sort of venom, as Mr. Fuller would name it, that has been cultivated in us, and this is self-hatred. Everything that we're taught, both directly and indirectly in the society, teaches us that we are nothing, or we're less than, or we're all of the negative attributes that one can think of. And so that persists with us, and it is something that is our deficiencies, get passed down generation to generation. And although many would acknowledge that racism is a thing, a lot of people don't embrace the full scope of its reach, and don't really understand it beyond the surface. We think in very emotional terms about it instead of scientific terms. And also because we have deficiencies that have been brought on by the constant mistreatment in all of those areas of people activity, we tend to want to embrace fantasy and what could be or should be, as opposed to facing the very stark and frankly depressing, if you don't know the solutions, reality of the system of racism, white supremacy, because it is pervasive, it's all encompassing. And so there are a lot of people and our dependency, our lack of financial resources, independent resources, and self-sufficiency makes us dependent on others for sources of support. And the same is true for institutions like Howard University. So you have that at play. You have the sort of rejection of reality, because it's just so much, so difficult to fathom. We're fighting against the currents of being taught that we're a democracy, and if you your merits will take you through, and you work hard, and things will work in your favor. So we have all of these things working against us. And on a very specific level, there have been a lot of people, even the noted African scholars of history and culture, who have rejected the terminology system of white supremacy or white supremacy. And there's an insistence that, well, they're not supreme, they're not superior, but that's not really what Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller's analysis indicated. Functionally, they're in a superior position, they meaning those who classify themselves as white, those who practice white supremacy. That doesn't mean they're inherently, naturally better than or more intelligent than or superior in any way. It means they're in the superior position in terms of power. And so they are able to functionally deliver both reality and imagery of superiority and inferiority in a way that promotes their narrative. And so until we get past an emotional burden and embrace reality, we can't change it. And if we're denying that the reality exists, it will remain unchallenged. And we just sink into saying, well, I'll think this way or do these things because they make my abuse and my mistreatment feel less uncomfortable. But you're not dealing with the system in a way that would dismantle it or eliminate it, and you're not thinking about replacing it. If you have the mistaken idea that it's always existed and it always will be. No, it has existed because it was constructed by people through their thinking. And so it can be deconstructed by people and thinking. But we can't do that from a position of denial of reality. Yes, very difficult, She was bombarded by, I'll call them unnecessary stressors, with those who were the institution that was positioned next to her, her home, just bombarded with noise and all kinds of intrusions on her property, and it was really taking a toll on her. She attempted all of the mechanisms through local ordinances and those kinds of things, and really was opposed every step of the way. But when you are deprived of sleep. And let me just back up and say, Dr. Welsing was so generous and just accommodating to her patient base. She would keep very late hours for her psychiatric practice to accommodate people who didn't have the flexibilities to just take off in the middle of the day and whatnot. So she kept late hours, and so her morning sleep, her rest was very important, and having that deprived and having to expend all of this energy trying to fight for basic habitability rights in her own home and on her own property, it definitely takes a toll. And there were a number of people who formulated or organized efforts to support her and to petition local government and governing authorities to do the right thing, and they didn't. In addition, Dr. Welsing's family members were ill. In particular, her younger sister was ill. That weighed on her, and also, there were a number of other things. I remember, when we look at the Crest theory of color confrontation, the imagery on the her first publication, which was written in 1970, that kind of laid it out. When you see the imagery that she formulated, it's designed in black and white with a particular narrative in mind. And this is the white minority on the planet, and this is the global majority surrounding it. And in the late the early to mid 20-teens, a so-called terrorist organization was named by the white supremacists, presumably ISIS. It was named as a leading global terrorist organization, and the ISIS flag, when you look at it, it is similar in its outlay to the imagery here, and the sort of manual as it was put out in the media that directed the ISIS terrorist organization activities was named the ISIS Papers. And so that when she saw that reported in the news, that made an impact on her, because there was concern that people who might have either the ISIS Papers or the Crest theory, say, in their book backpack or whatever, could be then accused of being aligned with a terrorist organization and all of that. So all of these things were weighing on her. However, she persisted in her strength, in her diligence, in her generous listening, in her keeping the institute going even in the midst of all of that. I remember one year she slipped on ice and fractured her arm, and she still showed up at the institute with one of those apparatuses that have screws coming out, all of that. So she was dedicated, and she even she said, even if I have to do this by myself, singularly, I am going to replace the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. And she even indicated that she would think to herself, formulate in her own mind an image of her taking a little rope and grabbing a little rope on an aircraft carrier and turning it around, meaning do whatever it takes, knowing that it's a massive job, but knowing that she has to do it. And one other thing I want to go back to, in speaking about families and members and the Institute. So before the Cress Welsing Institute was located at Howard University, it was conducted at the Howard Inn Harambe House, as it was known back then. And at that time, Dr. Welsing's older sister, Mama Lauren Cress Love, was still in the D.C. area, and Mama Lauren was one of the co-founders of WPFW Radio. She was a powerhouse within her own right. And the way it was set up, she would be at the door, Mama Lauren, at the door at the Cress Welsing Institute. We would have a tea break, sort of an intermission during the times. So, she played a role in the Institute. And after Dr. Welsing made her transition to the realm of the Ancestors, Mama Lauren came here from Chicago and stayed and was kind of back and forth between D.C. and Chicago for a while, and joined us as the Institute moved forward during those times. And certainly other family members, her nephew, Dr. Welsing, and Mama Lauren's nephew, who was the son of Barbara Lawrence, Dr. Welsing's younger sister and Lauren's younger sister. Her son, Trace Lawrence, has also been a student from afar of the Cress Welsing Institute, and was introduced very early to Mr. Fuller and his teachings, even as a child, and certainly Dr. Welsing's work, and has worked to maintain the legacy as well. So family and community commitments have been a huge part of what has kept things going. Yeah.
She was serious, but a lot of times she could be funny too, really. It's like, when you're a kid, when I was a kid, my mother had a cold. If you had a cold, so mother would give you some castor or something. Mm-hmm. But sometimes she put a little honey in it, though. Mm-hmm. So she was serious, as Nellie Fuller himself was serious, but they always had a sense of humor. And sometimes she just say things, and the whole class would just bust out laughing. And she says things like, white supremacists did this. Okay, well, let's give them more. Let's give them another A. Let's give them another A for the white side of the chest. She would just say stuff, man. She was very spontaneous. Mm-hmm. Very spontaneous. And she loved black people. Something like that. I mean, she loves black people, man. She worked for the benefit of black people her whole life, man. That's what I know. And she was just a wonderful person, man. Very dedicated. I like to say she was a soldier. I also like to say that Dr. Welsing, I'm trying to think of this phrase that I created, that she was the third eye of our struggle.
Okay, a few items. One at one of the Race Relations Institutes at Fisk University. She and I had a simultaneous idea that led to something significant. There was a white lady at the Race Relations Institute who said something we both thought was remarkable. There was a black male who, at the Race Relations Institute, which was a week-long set of meetings discussing racism, but yet he said, I don't want to talk about racism. I'm a Christian. And this older white lady said, "Sweetheart, let me tell you something. We gave you that religion." And Dr. Welsing and I were like, "Ooh, that's highly unusual." So the next morning, and I had already thought, wow, I want to interview that lady. And I was approaching Dr. Welsing, who was already speaking with someone else that morning, and I was about to say to Dr. Welsing, I think I'd like to interview that lady. And Dr. Welsing cut me off and said, "Sabrina, you could interview her." So that was a great moment because that interview was something that Dr. Welsing shared with many, many people, and even through the Cress Welsing Institute, because you had a person who classified themselves as white telling the truth about the system of racism, white supremacy, and how white people who classify themselves as white behave under the system, and frankly what they would do in the moments that we are experiencing right now, and that is really nothing. They would not come to our aid. But it was a very sobering reality for a lot of people who, began to think differently about the system of white supremacy. I loved, Dr. Welsing would also invite a few of us to her home, and she would cook for us, and I would cook for her. So, I'm from the South, so I can do a little something in the kitchen, but it was, I was heartwarmed that she, appreciated my cooking, if I can say that, to be a little bit immodest. But the laughter and the seriousness. I mean, she she delivered the truth, but did it in a way that wasn't like hitting you across the head. It was gentle but firm and serious. And so many of us who are part of the Institute as students were also patients and, benefited from her one-on-one guidance, for the mental state challenges that we faced as well. So I appreciate that. But the moments of laughter, but seriousness and just appreciation. She so appreciated the students and recognized how important it was to have a forum for exchange of ideas. And she learned so much because although she read multiple newspapers every day and all the journals and magazines, etc., she could not read everything, and she couldn't see everything that was happening. But you have all of these other eyes and ears out there who could bring things to her that confirmed and were provided more evidence of the very precise level of accuracy of her theoretical framework about what this thing is and why it exists, meaning the system of white supremacy. So, I have fond memories of her, and I am committed, along with others, to carrying the legacy forward. And in this moment, we in reviewing the catalog of her presentations, her lectures, all of interviews, etc., we see that she was prescient on so many issues and the relevance of what she said and her analysis and the code that she pushed us to, that Mr. Fuller formulated. It's all relevant in this moment, and it makes everything that's happening right now, not only in the concept called America, but globally, because we see a convergence of and a shift in the system of white supremacy in terms of how they conduct the mistreatment of people that they classify as white. And it all makes sense. We need and we have tools and a roadmap for us to accomplish the goal objective of replacing the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. We just have to be serious and do it. And the circumstances of now are actually going to help us, because we can't really fall back on some of the sort of the relaxed positions or the fantasy that everything's okay and that we've made all of this progress. Those many of the constructs, both legally, politically, educationally, in all of those areas, are being removed from us, are being erased, or being dismantled. We have to embrace reality. We have to be self-sufficient. We have to do the things that support our well-being as people who are classified as non-white under this system. And I think that the level of sort of extreme and the level of shifting of how the system of white supremacy is operating now in this moment is an indication of how desperate the situation is for them, for those who classify themselves as white. Because, you know, a more refined approach is favored, because when you are operating in a covert way, then, you know, people tend to be on autopilot and aren't looking at things or investigating things and get comfortable. But when there's a stark shift and just such a level of chaos that is different from, you know, most recent reality, there's an indication that there's a reason for that. And so I would just encourage everybody to, if you do nothing else in the next, you know, very short term, read, study, and share the functional definition of racism, white supremacy that Dr. Welsing formulated. Read the ISIS papers and study it. Read Mr. Fuller's United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, and follow the roadmap, follow the code, discipline ourselves, recognize that we're in dire straits, and just in terms of even the health of the planet, and if we are to survive in this planet and have a future for our children, our grandchildren, those to come beyond, it come in our future, we have to take action now, and it is imperative that we be serious and study and let go of the fantasy zone. You know, recess is over. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you have any final things you want to say? No?
I would say, well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. We appreciate that there's interest in hearing a bit more about Dr. Welsing and the things that we need to do going forward, and look out for more materials, especially on the web, as we both protect the integrity of the works of Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller, but also make things more accessible to folks. And just want to say, there are folks out there who are misrepresenting their relationship with Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller. There are people out there who are misrepresenting the content of their analyses and their works. And so those of us who did know them both and are students of their work, we're going to have to be more diligent about being able to help people discern what is truthful and correct from the things that are out there that have a different agenda. Yeah.
Chocolate rainbow, shades of black. Black, white, brown, red, yellow, and tan. All shades of the rainbow come from the original man. The missing link to what we as a people lack is loving who we are in all shades of black. Mocha, sepia, sable, red bone, cinnamon, mahogany, pearl. Children of the sun, living in a color-struck world. Whatever shade of ebony to ivory you might be, black is black, I am you, and you are me. You can't possess the soul essence of somebody else, so to love and know who you are is to be yourself. Beyond our shackles of sick, color-struck shame, as a people, we are all colored, one and the same. The one-drop rule will always undervalue and demean the wannabes, the jigaboos, and every shade in between. Black on black love is so power validation, despite our brown bag, blue vein indoctrination. Interracial prejudice, preference, and pride are reflections of a past that cannot be denied. As the human rainbow with the wind on our back, the power of self-respect comes in all shades of black. Honey brown, peanut butter, vanilla, chocolate, copper tone, cocoa maple, nocturnal rose, raven brick house, brownstone. Whatever shade of everyday to ivory you might be, black is black, I am you, and you are me. From ruby red brown to a black walnut pecan, lemon strawberry peach to a beach sand colored tan. The missing link to what we as a people lack is loving who we are in all shades of black. Chocolate rainbow, shades of black. I'm Poet Danny Queen.